Part 1. Opening. The most elegant alchemy of capitalism. The miner who extracts rough gemstones rarely makes the big money. True wealth belongs to the artisan who polishes the stone, sets it at the center of the world's most beautiful crown, and sells it to the emperor, who needs it most. The same holds true in the capital markets. Simply pouring money into an explosively growing industry is one-dimensional investing. A true architect restructures the business, aligns the desires of its members in a single direction, and performs the alchemy of handing over this entire ecosystem to a player on a completely different level. Today, on Restricted IC Feed, we examine the most elegant masterpiece of capitalist value creation, completed in just 3 years by the private equity firm KKR through CoolIT systems. Instead of merely cheering at the superficial return of a $4.7 billion exit, we will deconstruct the secrets behind its meticulously designed incentive structures and cross-industry integration. Part 2. Structure Breakdown. 15 times magic and the structuring of incentives. Stripping away all the flashy technical rhetoric found in the investment memorandum, let's take a closer look at what kind of magic KKR worked on this deep tech hardware company over just 3 years, from 2023 to 2026. In 2023, KKR acquired CoolIT Systems at an enterprise value of approximately $270 million. And now, just 3 years later, they have successfully sold the company for $4.75 billion in an all-cash deal. That is a 15 times return on invested capital in just 3 years. This is a phenomenal capital multiplication that will go down in the history of the global private equity industry. Something that cannot be described merely with the word jackpot. The market easily packages this as a timely windfall for liquid cooling infrastructure, cooling down the explosive heat of AI semiconductors. However, through the eyes of an architect, this 15 times quantum jump is not sheer luck, but the inevitable outcome of 2 meticulously calculated structural setups. The first setup is the innovation of the control mechanism, the perfect alignment of incentives. The public's common perception of private equity involves ruthless restructuring and severe cost controls. But KKR played a completely different card to maximize this company's value: the introduction of a broad-based shared ownership program. The design and mass production of liquid cooling equipment rely heavily on advanced engineering capabilities and speed in R&D. KKR discarded the legacy approach of handing stock options only to a few top executives. Instead, they made every employee, from the assembly line workers to the core researchers, partners in capital. As a result of this $4.7 billion sale, all 650 CoolIT Systems employees received an astronomical average cash payout of $240,000. Depending on their tenure, this translates to receiving anywhere from 1 to 8 years' worth of salary in a single lump sum, a true windfall. This was not mere benevolent welfare. It was the most cold, yet perfectly efficient governance design, fixing the gaze of every single member away from their daily paycheck and onto the singular goal of a massive exit 3 years down the line. The attrition of core personnel was completely controlled, and the density of quality control skyrocketed. They overturned the prejudice that private equity ruins companies, proving the positive leverage of capital that drives enterprise value to its absolute limit through tangible wealth distribution. The second setup is the crowning touch, and the most surprising twist of this deal: the redefinition of the exit partner. The buyer who bet the massive sum of $4.75 billion in all cash was not a big tech giant, nor a massive semiconductor vendor. It was Ecolab, the global leader in water management and hygiene. The market was shocked by the sudden entry of a traditional water treatment chemical company, that seemed entirely unrelated to IT or semiconductors. But dig just one layer deeper into the structure, and this is the most perfect strategic bolt-on. A data center's liquid cooling loop is not just physical piping circulating cold water. It requires a highly advanced fluid chemistry control network, operating 24/7 to prevent galvanic corrosion between dissimilar metals, control microbial growth, and ensure not a single drop leaks. Stuck in traditional industries, Ecolab made a bold pivot, declaring they too would become a core infrastructure partner in the AI ecosystem. They desperately needed CoolIT's hardware to sell their chemicals and water quality maintenance services into the goldmine of AI data centers. KKR didn't just sell CoolIT as a simple parts assembly company. They framed it as the exclusive tollgate for Ecolab's chemical services to expand into AI infrastructure. The overwhelming imagination to replace the physical limits of hardware with the massive infrastructure business of the traditional chemical industry, and the structuring of this cross-industry integration. This is the true structural driver that created a miraculous 15 times return in just 3 years by riding the explosive growth of the AI infrastructure market. Part 3. Governing Logic. The geometry of downside hedging. The public obsesses over the upside. How private equity firms generate astronomical returns. However, in the actual deal room, the place where top-tier GPS spend the majority of their time and legal fees, is not on how to make money, but on how to defend the principal and absolve their fund of liability when the worst-case scenario strikes. An architect structures a deal not just to generate profit, but to ensure they do not lose. The true artistry of this $4.7 billion transaction, KKR handing CoolIT systems over to Ecolab, lies in the ruthlessly cold downside protection and risk transfer mechanisms hidden beneath its flashy exit narrative. First, we must examine the capital settlement structure. This deal was a 100% all-cash transaction. If KKR genuinely believed in CoolIT's long-term vision, the success of a cooling-as-a-service (CaaS) platform through its integration with Ecolab, they could have structured a stock swap for a portion of the sale, allowing them to share in the fruits of future valuation expansion. Considering they had only held the asset for 3 years in the rapidly booming data center liquid cooling sector, retaining some equity might have yielded an even greater upside. However, they opted for a strict 100% cash liquidation. This means they perfectly offloaded the risk of hardware commoditization and the risk of cross-industry integration failure entirely onto the buyer, Ecolab, down to the last dollar. The moment the deal closed, KKR secured a position where they would suffer zero impact, whether this structural experiment ends in triumph or collapse. The true tail risk, hidden even deeper, is the astronomical liability for product defects. The essence of the data center liquid cooling business is flowing water and chemical solutions directly over NVIDIA GPU clusters, worth hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars. Imagine if a CoolIT coolant distribution pump halts, or a micro crack in a cold plate joint leaks coolant onto the servers. We are not talking about replacing a few $1,000s worth of parts. A total cluster shutdown leading to big tech operating losses, combined with punitive damages for destroyed servers, could instantly reach hundreds of millions of dollars. If such a catastrophic event occurs post-sale, the buyer will inevitably sue the seller, claiming they concealed a fatal defect and demand they disgorge the purchase price. To block this critical downside risk, KKR undoubtedly built an extremely tight defensive shield into the representations and warranties (R&W) clauses of the purchase agreement. They would have minimized the size and duration of any escrow holdbacks and strictly capped special indemnities for contingent liabilities to ensure fund returns remained untouched. Furthermore, They likely maximized the limits of their R&W insurance, completely transferring the liability of a potential leak to a third-party pool of capital, the insurance company. If there's a problem, fight the insurer, not us. This is the perfect shield to protect capital. Meanwhile, Ecolab, having paid a massive multiple that sparked overpayment controversies, also desperately needed downside control. What was Ecolab's greatest fear in this deal? The evaporation of brains. CoolIT's core value doesn't reside in factory machinery, but in a highly select group of core engineers capable of custom designing solutions for the hyper-exacting demands of hyperscalers. If, immediately after the sale, these key personnel defect to a massive Asian OEM competitor or spin off their own cooling startup, the $4.7 billion company Ecolab, just bought instantly, becomes an empty shell. The average $240,000 cash windfall, showered upon all 650 employees, was KKR's benevolent shared ownership, but simultaneously, it was Ecolab's ruthless human capital hedge. This massive compensation was likely not paid out entirely upon closing. It acts as a set of golden handcuffs, bound by strict lockup and vesting conditions, designed to be paid out in tranches only as key personnel remain with the company for a minimum of 2 to 4 years to successfully integrate Ecolab's water treatment chemical solutions into CoolIT's hardware. Ecolab willingly allocated a portion of the purchase price to an incentive pool to bind the most fatal risk, talent attrition, with the gravity of cash. In the deals of architects, there are no free lunches. Behind every act of goodwill lies a strictly calculated rule of downside control. Yet, even the most perfect-looking structures possess fatal detonators. Now, let's revisit the structural limits embedded behind this massive cross-industry integration from a perspective of cautious skepticism. Limits that, if triggered by external environments, could collapse the valuation entirely. The first fatal detonator is the technological substitution risk, hidden within the narrative of the business model's quantum jump. The synergy between CoolIT and Ecolab assumes that the current form factor, attaching a metal cold plate on top of a chip to cool it, is a permanent constant. But what if TSMC or NVIDIA, the true powers of semiconductor microfabrication, find the efficiency of this external attachment lacking and commercialize direct-to-silicon embedded cooling, drilling microfluidic channels directly inside the chip packaging? CoolIT's massive external piping value chain would instantly degrade into unnecessary legacy tech. The moment the hegemony of cooling shifts back from the hardware vendor to the semiconductor foundry, a terrifying butterfly effect occurs. Ecolab's physical entryway into the data center fluid control network simply vanishes. The second detonator is the collision of two different worlds. The friction cost of execution during post-merger integration, PMI. Ecolab is a conservative, massive B2B chemical corporation with over a century of history. CoolIT Systems is a deep-tech hardware startup accustomed to the breakneck speed of Silicon Valley. Ecolab's master plan is the successful landing of a KS, cooling as a service model, leveraging CoolIT's global hardware sales network to bundle their chemical maintenance services. However, overhauling an organization that used to sell one-off equipment and move on into a 24/7 subscription-based O&M, operations and maintenance, service organization that analyzes client water data and prescribes chemical solutions involves agonizing pain. Massive CapEx spending on hiring and retraining field engineers must precede this. The moment the gap in decision-making speed between the two organizations causes them to miss the timely demands of big tech clients, the service synergy model used to justify the high multiple may end up as a mere accounting illusion. Finally, the most uncontrollable variable is the destructive interaction with macro-environmental factors. Currently, The construction of sovereign AI infrastructure, fueled by massive sovereign wealth funds centered in the Middle East, is accelerating. These massive data centers, built in the middle of the desert, render air cooling completely impossible, forcing the adoption of liquid cooling, but simultaneously imposing a brutal stress test of extreme high-temperature climates. What happens if the specialized chemical coolants deployed by Ecolab hit their limits in boiling point control or corrosion inhibition in these extreme environments, resulting in chemical degradation? This isn't just a failure of a chemical solution. It leads directly to the paralysis of CoolIT's hardware, which is dependent on that solution. The moment this massive structural flaw surfaces, Ecolab's newly built identity as an essential AI data center infrastructure partner will face an irreversible collapse in reputation. Part 4. Syndicate Application. Designing the tollgate to ride the Leviathan. If you simply spectate this $4.7 billion financial engineering deconstruction as a bystander at someone else's feast, you will forever remain an information consumer, lingering on the outskirts of capital. The true purpose of this video is not to praise the greatness of KKR or Ecolab. It is to extract their logic of substituting structural blind spots and transferring risk, and to transplant that blueprint into you, so that you, even without capital, can design the board for your own business, community, or micro-GP syndicate. If you were to apply this structure to your own personal deal room or platform building, how could you leverage the skeleton of this massive transaction? First, design a Trojan horse strategy that embeds your one-off labor, CapEx, into someone else's massive subscription model, OpEx. Assume you are a highly skilled developer or a researcher holding data for a specific niche market. Most people sell their skills as outsourced projects or one-off consulting reports. That is akin to the margin-compressed world of simply assembling metal pipes, which is what CoolIT Systems was doing before they met Ecolab. Architects do not work this way. You must find a massive legacy corporation or platform in the market that makes big, boring money. Then, solve the single technical bottleneck they absolutely must pass through to enter a new market, like AI, using your weapon. Do not sell your technology as a one-off. Instead, embed a structural dependency into the contract. Stipulate that their main service can only operate while your system is running. Without spending a single dime, you can extract a permanent toll from the recurring revenue generated by a massive platform. Second, build a micro-syndicate that externalizes risk and controls the downside. Just as Ecolab transferred their leak risk to insurance companies and KKR's escrow, you too must escape any structure where you bear all the responsibility under your own name or credit. For example, assume you gather freelancers to form a small agency or project team. When signing contracts with clients, never take personal responsibility for the tail risk of a final product's defect or a market failure using your own capital or credit. Fracture the contract structure. Isolate the execution phase into limited liability project units and only take equity in the planning and structural design. If a problem arises, that specific project simply goes bankrupt, erecting a perfect firewall that leaves your main base completely untouched. Third, the less cash you have, the more precisely you must design the incentive lockup structure. Remember the logic of the golden handcuffs, where KKR and Ecolab showered 650 employees with hundreds of thousands of dollars, yet locked the payout timing 4 years into the future. When a junior, without capital, gathers highly capable peers to build their own community or platform, you cannot offer high salaries up front. Instead, you must strictly promise equity in future value, shared ownership. But ensure the conditions for that equity to vest are tied not to time, but to the achievement of specific structural milestones. For example, landing the first enterprise client, surpassing 10,000 MAU. The moment you align your colleagues' desires not with immediate cash, but with an exit that detonates only when the structure we built is completed, you become the true master of the structure, capable of controlling and mobilizing the top 0.1% of talent without any capital. Part 5. Closing. The Architect's Gaze. KKR's sale of CoolIT is not merely a victory in AI thematic investing. It is a masterpiece of structural design. It substituted the fatal risks of impending commoditization and margin compression with a highly attractive narrative of cross-industry integration into chemicals and water treatment. It transformed a one-off hardware business into a permanent infrastructure-as-a-service tollgate. And it perfectly transferred risk onto a massive strategic investor. Understanding this structure will not instantly make you a partner at a global megafund, nor will it grant you entry into the establishment that monopolizes data center piping. But if you understand this structure, you can design your own syndicate. We are not information consumers. We are structural architects. We do not stand at the door. We design the door. Structure Syndicate, Restricted, IC Feed. End.